Oh, hello. Series of videos about what we might do after the virus. Been looking at, you can download it, Policy Exchange's latest paper from a few days ago about academic freedom in the UK, which caused a little bit of a splash in the right-wing press, who managed to really badly report it. But of course they did, yes. It's been slightly criticised because of its sample size. Don't really care about that. I want to criticise it for other reasons, and it doesn't actually say what the Daily Mail, the Daily Telegraph and the Daily Express says that it does. Okay. First of all, I mean, yeah, fine, okay. The thing I like about it is, sociology fans, it does acknowledge that there is a moral panic around freedom of speech, particularly in academic circles. But the evidence that they use, and they think, oh, it needs to be evidence-based. Yeah, okay, fine. Doesn't actually join together. This is the basic problem. The fundamental basis of their questioning of people, and I'm going to quote here, okay, I'm not going to give you a page number, you can read it for yourself, there'll be a link down below as ever, plus the Daily Mail and the methodological problems. Anyway, all that stuff, okay? So, just going to quote, okay. Further, there is widespread support for discrimination on political grounds in publication, hiring and promotion. This threatens academic freedom and likely results in self-censorship. Only 54% of academics said they would feel comfortable sitting next to a known Leave supporter at lunch. Just 37% would feel comfortable sitting next to someone who, in transgender rights, advocates gender-critical feminist views. Well, okay then. However, those two things are not necessarily linked, are they? You see, I mean, part of the problem with this, I can imagine that the guys, bound to be guys, at the Policy Research Institute, when they wanted to look into this, were trying to think, well, what questions can we ask people? Because if you say to people, are you in favour of freedom of speech, almost nobody will say yes, even though they probably aren't. Quick example, Richard Spencer, well-known Nazi, yeah, it's fair enough to say that, I think, has been caught on film, freely admitted that he doesn't give a flying fart about freedom of speech. He's a Nazi. They don't. He just uses it as a wedge issue because it's quite emotive, and it means that he can turn up on university campuses in the States, cause a bit of a furore, and there you go, these horrible left-wingers won't let him speak. Okay, we'll come back to those in a little bit, but they aren't the same. If I get invited to lunch and I get to sit next to somebody's gran who I don't really agree with on a vast number of issues, I'm probably just going to keep my mouth shut. That doesn't mean that I want her removed from the room by armed guards, does it? No. It doesn't mean that if she wants to write a letter to the newspaper, I'm going to put red ink all over it. No. It is red ink, I think. Yeah, anyway, used to be back in the day. Yeah, and they aren't the same thing. So in order to try and sort of get to whether or not people feel comfortable with other people's views, you have to ask them those types of questions. And most people will say, yeah, I don't feel comfortable. But it works on both sides. It isn't a particularly sort of, oh, well, the left are so censorious. It's actually all of us that are going to do that, you know? I don't think Nigel Farage would want to sit next to somebody that is strongly in favour of open borders. He's probably going to feel quite uncomfortable. Yeah, he's probably going to write a letter to the press or go on in one of his inevitable radio shows or something and complain bitterly about the fact that he had to do this, yeah? I mean, there are... The problem with this, of course, is, I mean, you know, if you look back at the history of academia, and this is sort of where the sociology stuff comes in, there have always been schools of thought. Okay, if you want to get on a department, you will agree with your professor because they are likely to be gatekeepers. This is nothing new. This isn't a, post-2000s phenomenon. It's always happened in academia. That's why you often get some sort of quite... Individual countries often have sort of very, very quirky results with a lot of their individual departments. I mean, I'm not going to sort of state anything in particular, but even individual countries' medicines based on academic research at universities can end up with very, very different results as to what they prioritise with their population. It's knees in France for some reason. But anyway... The key thing here, and the argument that they're using is this probably is going on. Well, okay, then maybe it is, whatever. But then they're saying, well, we need regulation, and I'm thinking, you need to regulate free speech. Think about that for a moment. You need to regulate free speech. Yeah, you do. Yeah. But are we not saying that in terms of free speech in this country, either there should be no free speech or there should be lots of free speech, or we have to reach a compromise in the middle? And we are at a compromise in the middle. We don't have freedom of speech in this country. Effectively, we've never had freedom of speech. And in terms of academic institutions, if you look at what's said in the PREVENT strategy, they have a duty to not effectively to make sure that students are not being radicalised. It's already there. We don't need more regulation with this one. Just want to finish up with a final quote. They quote from Will Davis. It's a quote of a quote. Will Davis towards the end. Will Davis. The very notion of free speech has become a trap. Neo-fascist or alt-right movements now use it to attack alleged political correctness, use the principle of free expression to push hateful and threatening messages towards minority groups. Whereas intellectual freedom was once advanced in Europe as the right to publish texts that were critical of the establishment, it has now become tied up with spurious arguments surrounding the right to offend. Yeah. Now, if this gets agreed, if this kind of principle gets agreed, that the off-student body, off-stud, whatever they're called, and this, I am convinced that any new legislation around this will basically bog down any form of academic research for years. Because anybody who's right-leaning, and it will be right-leaning people, that feels they didn't get that promotion because were a member of the UKIP party, or they didn't really believe that transgender people exist, will therefore take their institution to the body. All right? And it will tie up the courts in knots. And certain people will certainly jump on that bandwagon. Yeah, because it really makes a nice fuss. Yeah, you can see Paul Golding and all the rest of them on the far right will really be rubbing their hands with glee at this one. If it goes ahead, I don't think it should. Okay. What their comment on it, which the Policy Exchange Forum, and do read the document because it's reasonably measured. I don't have any enormous problems with it, except methodologically it's a bit unsound, and I don't think it's saying anything new. However, their final comment, and then I'll bugger off, right? The observation is at least partially correct. Movements and individuals with neo-fascist and alt-right commitments clearly do appeal to free speech rights. There should be no mystery as to why this is. A cynical attempt to gain audience by playing the victim and seeking to hoist those committed to principles of tolerance and liberty on their own petard. Yeah. Well, we'll wait and see exactly who Toby Young is going to throw his organisation behind on this one. But have a look at the coverage in the Daily Mail, Daily Express, Daily Telegraph. That's not the way that they're reporting this at all. Yeah, anyway, reasonable. So, after the virus, kind of nice if we don't have legislation around free speech. You're just going to tie up the courts for years with this one. And it won't be nasty left-wingers. Because it isn't really. Anyway, it's just an idea.